Welcome to the fish tank.
Hey everybody, Fishman here. Welcome to the next installment of my video series, which is a 175 gallon reef system I'm building for a client. In this video, we're going to build the fish tank. Currently, as you see here, I've already delivered the stand to the clients, and I'm now in the process of installing the two front panels, which I left off, if you remember from the last video, because I wanted to install the filtration system before doing that. But when I brought everything to the clients, I realized that with one panel installed and the other panel made removable, I had just enough room to squeeze the filtration system in. So what I want to do is I want to leave the filter build until as close to the actual fill as possible, because I am currently acclimating the filter media, and I want it as active as possible, and this way we'll have less die-off. The panel I'm currently adjusting is the one that's going to be installed permanently. The procedure for doing this is identical to the back panel that you see there in the last video when I installed that, which is to get it adjusted in the right place, and then put two screws into the top, and then flip the whole thing over and do the same thing for the bottom. The panel that you see over to the right will be the one that's going to be installed so that it's removable. Unfortunately, the biggest problem I've had with all these things so far is actually just the filming of everything, and that particular footage ended up being blurry, and therefore I won't be able to show you. Maybe in a future build this will come up again, and hopefully I will get to show you how to make a removable panel. But basically it's just two brackets, top and bottom, because it's direct transference of weight. The brackets actually don't do anything except just keep it from moving side to side, which actually, once all the water, weight, and everything else is on top of it, it doesn't do anyway. And this is the underlay that I'm bringing down and adjusting. If you remember from the last video, the underlay is cut 1/8 inch all around narrower than the stand, and it is 1/8 inch all around wider than the tank. So I need to adjust it fairly accurately here, because the brackets have to go on, and I don't want the brackets sticking out past the edge of the tank at any given point. And it's much easier to fiddle with and move now than it will be once the aquarium is built and put on top. So it's just best to take a few extra minutes at this point and then do that. Now sometimes you get a bit of grit or dust or sawdust or whatever on this surface, and I just wipe it all off just to make sure. I don't want anything touching the glass that could cause an issue, even though the tank's actually going to be slightly raised above this surface. I just don't like taking any chances. So there we go. We're going to bring in the bottom. I'm going to slide it in place, and then there's going to be a very lengthy process here now of cleaning all the glass. But as you can tell, speed has picked up. One of the things I finally learned how to do in my video editing is now I can do everything in fast forward, so everything's going through at 4 times normal speed. So yes, what happens here is I'll clean all the glass. This is the bottom, so the most important part that needs to be cleaned with this is the edges, because that's where the silicone is going to attach the front, back, and sides. But I just clean it all anyway, because it's always nice to have a clean surface for the clients going to come by, obviously, and have a look at the new tank. And it's always nice that it's all shiny. So I'll give everything a good cleaning, but I'll pay particular attention to the edges where the silicone adhesion will take place. And then I'll move this off to the side, and we will get to the next piece, which in this case is either the front or back. That's another one of the large ones. You'll notice all these little cork spacers, basically, which the shipper puts on. Basically prevents any of the glass from rubbing against each other. Just remove those, and then give it a good clean. When I did this originally, what happens is, because this is tempered there, actually you just saw me do it there. You saw me rub my finger underneath the glass. That's where the temper mark is. So every time you temper glass, they stamp the glass, and I make sure whenever I build a tank that particular mark is on the outside, so no coral will bump up against it. And usually what I do also is I will make sure that it is either in a lower right hand corner or a lower left hand corner, and basically out of sight. Now, because this is a front or back and the temper mark will be on the outside, the non-temper mark side is the side that I have to pay particular attention to, which will be the facing. That facing has to be the cleanest part of the tank. And then we'll move on to the next piece, which is again the front or back, and we'll move all the cork pieces and continue rubbing this to get it all nice and clean. Again, paying particular attention to the non-temper mark side, the face of it, which will be attached to the bottom and the two ends. And then we're going to move on to the two smallest pieces. It's kind of interesting and kind of actually disconcerting as well watching this and fast forward. When I originally put all this video together and I looked at the timing for it, it was going to be like an hour and a half long, and I didn't think anyone wanted to sit through that just watching me clean glass. So it does cut things down quite quickly, but it's very bizarre trying to narrate this while I'm moving in super fast mode. Like I want to speak faster or something. And once this piece is cleaned, all that's left to clean are the two end pieces, which are much smaller and easier to handle. But as you can see here, I've moved on to the taping process. Unfortunately, because it's in fast forward, you're not getting to see it as clearly, but this is also a very lengthy process. If anyone's done like painting of a room or whatever, the cutting is always the hardest. And basically this is kind of the same sort of thing. What you're doing is putting tape on, allowing for the thicknesses of glass, and where the bead will basically squeeze out when you put two sheets together. And when you smooth that bead over, you want that excess silicone to be smeared onto the tape and not onto the glass. So when you peel the tape off, you'll end up with nice straight lines. Again, exactly the same as if you were painting, but in this case it's getting the excess silicone away. And here I'm going to move on to the end pieces, and again just taking off the cork and cleaning. While I was planning on how to record this particular video, I had to make a couple decisions early on. You'll notice that the camera has been back at like a specific vantage point, and though you can see everything that's going on, there's not really a lot of detail. The reason for doing this is when I actually get to the point where I'm building the aquarium itself, I don't want the camera anywhere near what I'm doing, mostly because building an aquarium is a one-go process. There's aren't going to be any retakes. It's not like when I'm doing the narration for this, where if I say too many ums or too many, in either case, basicallys, I can just re-edit or re-record and just copy over it or whatever. There's only about 5 minutes between when I place a bead and when I can actually squeeze it on, so there's no skinning takes place. So what I have to do is do it as quickly and as accurately as possible, like in one go. So it was important that the camera and the tripod were back out of the way, and there's no chance of me tripping over it or having to worry about where it's placed, and you can see everything. So all I need to do is hit record and then focus my attention on what needs to be focused on, which is the build of the tank itself. Unfortunately, that does mean you get a little less detail, as here with the taping of the end pieces. Taping for the ends is different than the front and the back. You don't have to allow for any thickness of glass because it is on the inside. So what you need to do is just give a little bit of a gap. When you squeeze out the silicone, there's a bit of exposed glass this way, and it will end up protecting the edges of the glass, because it is tempered glass and you want to just protect it as possible. It's funny actually, the things that go through your head while you're building fish tanks and trying to record stuff and whatnot, because I think it was about at this point when I realized, well, if you remember from the beginning, I first cleaned the bottom, and then I cleaned one of the facings, and then the next facing I started doing taping. Well, that main facing is still untaped, and I decided that, well, I better show you at least some of it. So there I am checking the temper mark. And as you can see, we're no longer in fast forward. I'm going to try and give you a little bit of detail here of at least one edge being taped. Once I get my hands out of the way, you'll see. This seems so slow now. Alright, you can see here that I'm allowing for the thickness of the glass, which in this case is 10 mil or 3/8 if you're into the British system. And there's also a little bit of extra so that when I squeeze out, I will end up with a little bit of glass which has silicone contact. Now you notice I put a little bit of a fold over on the top of this. That basically marks where the top of the tape is, and also because it's folded over, it doesn't stick to anything, and it allows me for easy removal later on. And you can't really see it, even though this is supposed to be giving you more detail, but on the far end of this sheet of glass, you'll see that the tape does not go all the way to the bottom. You realize that once this facing, which is the front, goes on, there's it has to allow for the thickness of the bottom. Now we're going to move on to the actual build finally. It's been, for me, well, it's been about 2 hours of build, and for you guys, well, what are we up to now? Oh, 10-minute mark. Not too long for you guys. So I just checked where the temper stamp is, and then if you remember from the beginning, I said that the tank is actually not going to be built on the piece of wood. There's going to be a bit of a gap, and that's what I'm doing here right now. There's two ways you can do this. Sometimes what I do is I'll cut a piece of plywood, like a thin sheet, like either an 1/8 or 1/4, depending upon what I have handy. But in this case, I'm just going to use the cork spacers that came with the tank. The whole point of this is when you run a bead of silicone along the edge of the glass, and then you squeeze another piece of glass up against it, you need a place for that silicone to go. So if you don't allow for a gap between the wood and the tank bottom, you end up getting bubbles build up there, and you don't have a nice clear clean bead. So I always basically create a space. In this case I'm going to use the spacers because I didn't want to have to cut another piece of plywood and then drill all the holes and do all the placing for that. So this is a much simpler system. I've also used egg crate and other things as well. There's no real support being supplied by these things. Once the silicone's all dry, it's just being supported by the silicone itself. So there's a bead all the way around the edge, so the bottom actually kind of free floats. But to get it, like I said, to get that nice even bead, I'm going to put it up here to begin with. And now comes the painstaking process of centering the bottom of the tank and its underlay. And as I said many times, the underlay has to be 1/8 inch all around inside the stand, and the bottom needs to be centered on top of that. You don't have to be perfect with this because you can adjust it after the tank is made, but the tank is going to be quite heavy because it's 175 gallons, and each of these sheets weighs anywhere between, well, the larger ones, between 50 and 80 pounds. The fully built tank is going to be fairly heavy, so I want to get as close as possible. Now if I had to be really accurate, I would template this and then just use the template to make sure everything's centered, but like I said, because you can adjust afterwards, I'm just going to eyeball it. Though in retrospect it probably would have been faster just to use a template, because this takes an awful lot of fiddling. When you adjust one side, you sometimes knock off the other side a bit, and then you go adjust that side and you push back the other side a bit, and again you go back and forth quite a bit. But it won't take that much longer. And then the next process is to re-clean the edges, because I have been playing with them quite a bit, and I will wipe them down. And again, that's the facing, the actual edge of the bottom piece that's the most important. And as I'm not sure I recorded it all, but each piece that I do, I will recheck the cleanliness of it before I actually silicone it. And one other thing I'd like to mention, hold on a sec before we get to that part, you don't need to put on the fittings for the filtration system at this point, but it's easier to reach them at this stage because you don't have to reach over a 2-foot piece of glass. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put on the 2 bulkheads, and what I do is I run a bead of silicone all the way along the threads for the fitting, the male fitting here, and I'll just place that in on top of there, hold it in place, and then just screw on the female end on the other side. I prefer to use silicone instead of Teflon tape. I find the silicone will fill all the little nooks and crannies, and also will get between the a bit of a flashing on the edge there. It will also cover that, so it gives you a much better fitting. And once it dries, it makes a very good gasket. And then I'll do the same for the other male fitting here. Unfortunately, I'm in the way, so you can't really see it. Basically, I just rotate the male fitting all around and squeeze out a bead of silicone. And that way, I make sure I cover all the threads. I can't really see it. I'm back to my old vantage point here. Now I'm going to hold it down, and then I'm just going to screw it on. And again, it's the threads that are holding it in place, and the silicone's just acting as a washer, gasket, whatever you want to call it. And then we'll do, just to protect the edge of the hole, and basically to also protect the seal, I'll run another bead of silicone around the inside and just smear it in place. These two fittings are going to be underneath all the sand and coral and whatnot, so it's always a good idea to have a little extra protection. I don't think it really matters much, but it's a habit I got into a long time ago, and I keep it up. So I'll run a bead around here, and then again on the other side, and then I'll just smear it out with my finger. You don't need to have any concerns for aesthetics, because you'll never see these things. They're just going to be covered up with sand and coral, and that'll be the end of that. And next we're going to move on to the build, finally! Which brings me to the only important deviation actually in this build than what I normally do. Normally when I build fish tanks, I use two large pneumatic suction cups that I have, and which, well, they're rated for about 200 pounds a piece, and that way I can hold the glass firmly. And if the glass is heavy enough, this one really isn't, but I'll get also to one or two bodies to help me lift it, and then I'll just do the actual placing part. But because this is a DIY project, what I've decided to do here is I am going to forego using the suction cups because, well, they're like $200 each, and most people won't have access to that sort of thing. So I'm actually going to lift it by hand, and as I do so, I'll explain the technique involved so that you can place it properly. Right now what I'm doing is I'm setting up for the first two seams that I'm going to silicone. The first seam is going to be the bottom, which is going to be the back and the right hand side, and that piece that you see, which is one of the end pieces, is set up so that the vertical seam will also receive silicone. And then what I'll do is I will bring in the back piece, place it, and then I will get my handy helper here to hang on to the edge of that, and we'll place this end piece as well. So right now I'm just running the bead. It doesn't need to be yes, get out of the way. It doesn't need to be perfect, because this is the bottom. You're never going to see it. All that matters is there's excess silicone, so that when I place the side piece of glass on, what happens is it will any bubbles or waves in the silicone, whatever, will all get squeezed out, and it'll be nice and clean. Alright, so I'll put the silicone now on the edge. This is the vertical edge, which will be on the back, and then we're all set to do the first placing. So as I said, it's important how you hold your hands for this. So what I'm going to do here is, you'll see as I bring it in, it doesn't matter so far, but watch be my left hand, it'll be on the bottom. What I'll do is, as I rest it on my foot there, I will hold most of the weight with my upper right hand, and then all I'll do is I'll hold the bottom edge, literally, like the very bottom of the tank, on the my fingertips basically, until I have it placed on the margin, which is about 3/8 inch wide. It's not very wide, but it's wide enough. And then I'll smooth it in, as I can tell how it's being placed by the color of the bead. And then get my handy helper here. Ugh, got a lot of focus. It's so annoying. I can't edit this out because it's one of the crucial parts now. Alright, so she holds that. I will squeeze out the silicone, and this is kind of a more art than anything else. If you build enough tanks, don't lean too far forward. You basically place it according to hold on a second. What's happening here is I'm getting her to lean back so that the top part of the tank's leaning back a bit. Then I'll place in the bottom part, and then I'll slide it over and bring that leaning sheet of glass up against it. That way, as soon as it's vertical, you'll see she's not really touching it anymore. As soon as it's vertical, it's basically good. And then what I'll do is I'll go around and I'll make sure that, as I was trying to say earlier, the color of the bead. You don't want you don't want to squeeze it too tight so the glass is touching the glass. You want actually have silicone in the gap, and the amount of silicone is like the art part I was trying to tell you. It's the leaving that amount. So you want it not clear, but you want it translucent. And then I'll use my finger to smooth out that bead. The bottom part is irrelevant. Now what we're going to do is we're going to lift up the top part, and as I get near the top where I might be putting pressure on the glass, I will hang on to the edge so it doesn't slide out. And then I'll clean the outside, and then once they're perfectly aligned and everything is the right color and everything, I will peel the tape off. And that would be the tape for the back end. Fortunately, since this video is done, I've since figured out the issues I was having with the camera, and I don't have this out of focus problem anymore. But it's so irritating. But as I was saying earlier, this is a one-shot go. There's no redos here. And then as I pull the tape off, you end with a nice, clear, straight line. And then the part that's important, even if you get a little bit of a smear, is not to fiddle with that line, because it's easier to razor off that vertical, if there's like a vertical smear or touch on the glass. I think I can see one from here. If it's a fairly large piece, it's easy just to razor it off later on. Don't play with it. If you try to adjust it too much, you just make a mess. And for some reason, I still do this. It's not really necessary, but I stick a piece of tape on. I don't know why. It doesn't do anything. The glass is being held in place by the silicone and gravity. So as long as they're vertical, they'll stay in place. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run the bead for the bottom on the left, and then I will also do the vertical for the left-hand side. And this is all do-it-yourself at this point, because the only time you ever actually need anyone to help you at all is with that first sheet that you put on the back and front, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Don't run out of silicone. What I've done on some builds when I don't have a person to help me with that first sheet when I'm putting it on, is what I'll do is I'll build a frame, and then I'll have a mechanism where I just attach it to either with clamps or whatever to like the back support there. And after I place the first piece, I'll just move the frame into place, tape the first glass to it so it doesn't lean forward or back, and then come over to the side and put on the end piece. Now when you do it that way, you don't have the luxury of having the other person lean back a little bit to give you clearance. So what you have to do for it is what I'm going to do for this piece once I finish putting the bead on. And you can see by that bead, it doesn't matter if it's straight or clean or whatever, as long as you have excess, because you don't want any bubbles. You want to be able to squeeze all that out, and in that case what you need is excess silicone. So I end up wasting a lot of silicone doing this. But now I've got that in place, we're going to stick this sheet on. So we'll do is lift it up. And so what you have to do here is you got to place the bottom part on first. And you got to place, and when you place it, you leave a gap, enough of a gap for that bead to clear the back piece of glass. So you slide it in place, lean it up, squeeze a bit of that silicone over, and then just slide it over until they meet. And then the process is the same for the other end. What you do is squeeze out the right amount of silicone, get the right amount of clarity as before, make sure everything is vertical and in the place it belongs, and then you know, make check for bubbles and that sort of stuff. And then we'll smooth out the beads and remove the tape, make sure everything's where it needs to be. Oh, need a little bit more of a squeeze here by the looks of it. And like I said, this is one of those things that you learn by doing and get a feel for. And once I have it where I want it, I'll clean that bead up. There we go. I like lots of extra silicone on the bottom. It keeps small bits of gravel and whatnot from getting in where it doesn't belong. And the only aesthetic part is the vertical seam, and that's why those are taped. Wandering around with a gob of silicone on my finger. Then I'm going to clean that off, and then I'm going to clean that back edge, and then I'll remove the tape. It's been a long build. I mean, for you guys it's only been about 25 minutes, but for me it's been about 3 hours. There you go, take the tape off. Now we got 4 sheets on now, so all that's left is the final front piece. Yeah, there we go. So what we'll do now is we'll run a bead along the entire front edge, which is down the left side, across the bottom, and then up on the right side. It's a bit trickier cleaning up the bead for the front piece because you have to reach over the glass. It does help to have long arms. If not, I guess you'd have to use a step stool or something. Oh yeah, I gotta put on my ceremonial piece of tape too. Making sure everything's in place. Once you have the glass placed like I have, you do have a little bit of time to fiddle with it. The only part that is important is initially when you put the bead on and then you put on the piece of glass. Like I said, you got about a 5-minute window for skinning process. And once the silicone skins, it's not as tacky and don't get as good a seal, so it's always best to do that part quickly. Well, once it's up, you can fiddle with it for a little while. Alright, here we go. Run the final bead. First down this side, and then across the bottom, and then up again. And then again, we're not going to use suction cups, we're just going to place this by hand. This sheet is actually a little trickier than the first one. The first one, when you put it on, there are no verticals, so you can place it, and then once the bottom is in place, you can slide it back and forth and get its positioning proper. But in this case, you actually have the 2 verticals in place, and you have to try to get it as close to being where it needs to be as possible the first time. And that often doesn't happen, so what you need to do is make sure you lean back so that the 2 verticals don't touch the sheet of glass at all. And then what you can do is, once you have the bottom in place, then you can check with your fingers and see that you have everything where you need to be before you move it into the vertical position. Alright, here we go. This time I've trying to level it out here. Yeah, man, you can do it. There we go. And once I have it in place, I slide it in a bit. And as you can tell, although I can't tell at the moment, I am too far to the left. I'm just figuring that out now. So I'll switch hands, and then I'll use my left hand to slide it over. You can see moving in until basically what I'm doing is I'm feeling with my fingers to where the edge of the glass comes and meets the other one. And once I have it in place and vertical, I'll make it well, basically as perpendicular to the base as possible, so that we don't have to worry about the sheet moving. And then we're good enough for me to let go, and I'll get the silicone off my hand here. Oh, never mind. So I'm gonna get my helper to help me out. Not really necessary at this point, but she's here, so I'm also make use of her. Alright, got the silicone off. Now I will do the same thing as before, squeezing the silicone out. What you need to do, though, the most important part here is, you can't just push on the front. You need to, there you go, hang on to the back, so that you are compressing the two together, and not like just shoving the back, and that way you can end up pushing the back piece off. And again, it's all by experience and sight and having done it before, and pushing it all together, and then inspecting all the seams and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Alright, I think we're good enough now that we can get her to let go. Yep, off she goes. Trying to stay out of the way of the camera. And then the rest is just a bit of fiddling here now. Sometimes with a sheet that's long like this is well, 6 feet basically, and you end up with a bit of the glass can actually bow, and you end up with the tank not quite being, you have to push on the middle a little bit to get the silicone squeezed out of the center bit, but it doesn't take that much work. Once you have it up, and you can, like I said, you can fiddle with it for a little while, and then examine the seams and see if you like where everything's placed. And then I'm going to do shortly here, I suspect. Looks like I must have moved something. I'm going to reach over the edge and clean up that bead. Yeah, there we go. Ugh, out of focus again. I'm so glad I fixed that problem. Alright, clean the outside. And then we'll reach over, I think. Maybe not yet. I gotta clean that side first. Alright, now we're gonna go up. There we go. That's a bit of a reach. The most important thing is not to lean against any of the glass. Well, like I said, it helps to have long arms. Looks like I didn't quite get the end there. I'll get back to it though. There we go. And then finish off. It's easy to see when you're doing it. You can't quite see it in the camera that well, but once you're when you're actually standing right over it, it's quite easy to see. Now we're gonna take. Oh, actually, looks like I already took the tape off one side. I guess it must have got way too blurry for you guys to see. But at this point, the tank's actually pretty much finished, so there's no real new stuff happening here. I'm just gonna take the tape off, and then I'm gonna put on the 2 ceremonial pieces of tape again. And then I'm going to spend probably about 5 or 10 minutes and go back and forth, make sure everything is square where it needs to be, check for bubbles, make sure everything's placed properly, make some final minor adjustments, and then basically it's a tank. There goes the tape, and then it'll be the same for the other side. So this is basically the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. The next video will be me fabricating the framing for this tank. I frame all my tanks now. I don't allow them to support, even though silicone will support it all on its own. I like to put frame around it, make sure the frame has the ability to support it as well. So that will be the next video. And then for those of you who've been waiting since the beginning of this for the canister filter, the leak-proof canister filter installation, that will be after that video. So as I thought, not originally, but after like the last video, so it'll be the video 5. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Hey everybody, thank you for watching my video. If you liked it, please slap a like below, or if you want to see more of this type of video or some of my other work, please subscribe to my channel. And I will see you there. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.